It's time to check in on the top performers in the Arizona Fall League. You got Aram, Elijah Evans. It's the call up. We're on the back end here. It's almost over. The Fall Stars game, that was always fun. I think it's always a reminder that they should probably stream a couple more games, I think, or at least make them a little bit more visible. I think that was an enjoyable contest. You had the home run derby, which we're going to talk about a little bit as well. But season goes really quick, and there's a lot of games that happen really quickly, and there's already more performers, I think, for us to check in on. So excited to do just that.
Yeah, and that's what's fun about the Fall League is you get a variety, right? Like the names we're going to talk about today, you got some huge names, right? There's some of these guys where you expect them to go to the Fall League and rake, and then you've got guys where we may not have talked about these guys all season, and they get to Arizona, they have a huge fall, and we might see them in the big leagues next year after they have this kind of big performance here. So we're going to do hitters today. We'll talk a little bit of Fall Stars and a little bit of Derby, and then just focus on the hitters of the AFL. Next time, either next week, either later this week or next week, we'll get into some pitchers, but we'll focus on the hitting side today, and we got to start with the Derby, man, because I didn't watch it live. I will admit the home run Derby of the AFL, but the first headline I see is 122.9 from Tony Blanco, who ultimately wins the home run Derby. Pirates prospect 122.9. Are we serious?
Yeah, off of BP just arm, right? Like that's where I think it's the most mind numbing is how do you produce that when the ball is coming in at like 60 miles an hour, whatever it is, off of a BP arm. It's one thing when it's 90, 97 miles per hour and you square it up, but to turn that ball around at north of 120 is outrageous. And I mean, this is a reminder here that look, Blanco is there's a lot of concerns, like hit tool wise. I mean, obviously, kind of skews towards DH slash maybe first base, but I think this is probably the most powerful hitter in the minor leagues. I don't think there's any way around it. I don't think there's anybody really producing more insane batted balls than that, really, almost at any level. So it's a fascinating like, just player to watch. He was hurt for the majority of the year, so this is where the fall league is fun too, right? He's only played at low A. He was 19 years old at the start of the year, but I mean, if you're capable of producing batted balls like that, you're worth some attention. And I think Blanco is turning a lot of heads. It's just a matter of can he cut down on the whiff.
Yeah, I mean the home run derby this year. So it was in this cool like teammate format where they worked as teammates throughout the early rounds, and then the final was you go against your partner, right? So his partner was Esmerlyn Valdez, who's been the star of the fall league, right? But then you get this awesome thing where it's like they were first of all they were cheering for each other, where they had to go against each other, but they were supporting each other. And then Tony Blanco winning it, like Valdez wasn't even upset at all. It was almost like, hey, I've been in the shine all fall, like this is your moment, bro, like go for it. And then I mean, 24 homers in 3 rounds from Tony Blanco, and they were gassing out at the end there. Valdez and Blanco were both getting tired at the end, but 122.9. There was a number of other homers that were like nearly out of the stadium. I mean, it's not just like in the minors. Like, there's not many guys in professional baseball that have
No,
the power
period.
Tony Blanco has, and there's a lot of question marks, of course, like you mentioned there. But pure power, like nobody is doing this other than like maybe the Jarkon, like Stantons and Otanis of the world, right?
Yeah.
Like it's crazy.
No, and that's the reason why I think he's just going to be worth following. I mean, like
Yeah.
if it's a 40 hit tool, there's going to be a role for this guy. So, and I think when you look at, he's not going to be a heat sheet candidate in Blanco, but you consider the fact that he missed a majority of the season. He this year, going into this year, had never played above the complex, so I played a little bit of low A, struck out a lot, and you have a 13 game sample here in the AFL where he's holding his own. He's striking out 30% of the time, which is not really egregious, compared to I think he was striking out more in low A last year, and considering some of the arms that he's seeing, so a little bit of a step in the right direction, and we'll see, if he can kind of build on this and what it looks like, as I imagine he repeats low A next year as he's healthy, but very, very special power. It's clearly 80 grade. And I think the Derby was fun. And I think it's something that I hope they can keep building on and making, more exciting spectacle. But who would have thought, we'd have two Pirates prospects showing it down here at the end. And again, it shows that they've got some intriguing bats all of a sudden in that system.
Yeah, 100%. It's pretty fun. Looking at the Fall Stars game, I don't know. I watched some of this game, and it was cool to see just a variety of players there. Ends up on a walk-off from a guy we're going to mention later. Anybody from just a collection there, or just your general thoughts on this game? And I agree with you, first of all, that like there should be more highlighting of these games because this was really fun. It was like a close game all game. You got to see a variety of different looks from the pitchers. You saw some different hitters that, were big names, some smaller names, right? It was just a fun game, and I wish there was a handful of AFL games that we got to see broadcasted.
Yeah, I mean, I think across the board, the arms were really, exciting. Anytime you get to see these top prospects in one inning spurts and you see the stuff tick up,
Yeah,
right? Like Carson Milbrandt averaged 97 on the fastball. Luis De Leon, the Orioles, averaged 97 on the fastball. You had Hagen Smith, ticking back up to,
yeah,
to nearly 97. I think it was like 96 and a half, and he was throwing strikes. So that was always great to see. Like Anderson Brito from the Astros was averaging 98. Like you just had high octane stuff across the board. And I think that made it really fun as well. And then, you know, we always feel like I always feel like we're talking about Kevin McGonigal, but Kevin McGonigal is just the gamer of all gamers to take two bags on a walk, right? The ball four was a wild
yeah,
pitch and he just books it right out of the box and ends up on second base. Like that guy has one speed, whether it's Arizona Fall League exhibition or, the most important game of their double A season in the playoffs. Like this is a guy that just is always going full speed. And I thought that was just another, fun example and reminder of that. But I really thought the main show was the pitching, and just
yeah,
seeing the stuff that these guys have just across the board. I think we had seven different pitchers average, north of 96 on the fastball, and a lot that were averaging
yeah,
98 plus. So, and this is the fall league, right? So I think that was the
yeah,
fun aspect of it. And then I thought it was a little bit of a statement for Rody Rodriguez, who, uh, the
yeah,
Angels prospect. I mean, he kind of came out of nowhere this year. Was older for low A, 21 years old, but had this exciting season that earned him, I think, the nod in the fall league. He's validated that by just destroying the fall league. And then you look at this Fall Stars game where there's a lot of prospects who are higher profile than him in terms of prospect pedigree, and he's the only guy that had a pair of hits in it. So I just thought it was another little statement from Rodriguez, who looks like he could be a little bit of a climber here in this Angel system, as he enters his
yeah.
age 22 season.
Yeah, I was gonna say he's on the list, so we might as well just take it away with him. But that's a guy who I had been keeping an eye on a little bit because the numbers were great, and a small college, not a big name, definitely nobody that was particularly on radars at least going into this season, right? Not someone we were talking about at all. But for an Angels team that needs some more depth in that system and some more overall talent, he's had a great fall overall. I mean, his numbers across the board have been pretty excellent this fall. He's hitting 421 in the fall league
Yeah.
with a 507 OBP, and obviously these numbers are very small sample based, but still the strong plate discipline, doesn't strike out a ton, has walked a good amount, and has just looked like one of the better outfielders in the league so far.
I mean, it's been ridiculous in terms of just how consistent the production's been for him out there, even in that small sample. And I always look at the fall league as like an opportunity to just further validate what you did this year, especially if you're a low A guy that, probably was a little bit older for the competition, like Rodriguez is. Like this is an opportunity to show, hey, I can kind of do it against all types of arms. And his final 40 games of the regular season, he had an
Yeah,
1,045 OPS and hit 362. So now you combine in, the Arizona Fall League, and I mean, it's a ridiculous sample. Just going from like August 1st onward. It's a 51
yeah.
game sample combining low A at the end of the season of low A and the Arizona Fall League. 51 games here. He's slashing 400,
Oof.
487, 632. It's an 1118 OPS, a 19.8% K rate, and a 14.5% walk rate, 8 homers, in that span. So I understand it's, low A in the Arizona Fall League, but this is a guy that was maybe not even cracking the names to watch, going into this year, and now is somebody worth monitoring in this Angel system. And I think that's what the Fall League is all about.
Yeah, I mean, 19th round pick who just put up those numbers recently, but even on the season total, almost 40 stolen bases, 15 homers, right? Like that's a really good year from a guy who was again, a high school dart throw almost, if you could say it that way, in 2023, right? So now you see him breaking out into a legit prospect in that system. The next guy we kind of already touched on a little bit, so I'll frame it to you a different way here with Esmerlyn Valdez, who is probably one of the top two or three candidates for Fall League MVP. There's another guy we're going to talk about who definitely could get that honor as well. How hard has it been for you to try and rank Valdez maybe in or on the edge of the top 100 here as we head into what will be your top 100 drop later this week?
Yeah, it is difficult because you know, there's not a lot of value beyond the bat, but there's a lot of guys in the top 100 that are like that, right? So you got to really be confident in the bat, though, and I think there's a lot of reasons to be, and I think that's why we've seen him really elevate in terms of his just prospect status, in terms of just what Esmerlyn Valdez, uh, the overall perspective in the organization. And I mean, you couldn't really ask for much more in the fall league. He's been as patient as ever. He's not missing mistakes. He's pulling the ball in the air at a really high clip. I mean, he's walking almost twice as much as he's striking out. And it's not like this is out of nowhere, right? I mean, this is just carrying on and further validating what has been a breakout season for him, at the high A level. And the thing I keep going back to with Valdez, and the thing that continues to encourage me with him is that you look at the numbers in high A and you look at the numbers in double A, and in double A, of course, the production took a little bit of a hit, as normally is the case, but it doesn't tell the whole story. Because I mentioned this on the show a couple of times. Like he dominated over the final like 20 plus games of the season at Double A. So it took a little bit of time to get his footing. Once he did, he was right back to absolutely dismantling baseballs, and then we've seen the same in the fall league. So it's interesting because assuming he follows that up and just continues to produce the way that he was in Double A, it's going to be really hard to count him out as a top 100 prospect. But he's got to consistently mash, to be that guy. So he's right on the edge right now, and like it's tough. It's tough because there's so many good players, and that's why it's so tough to figure out exactly who fits in that 100. But he's definitely made a strong case, especially as the plate discipline has looked, as impressive as it has been, in the Arizona Fall League.
Yeah, it's a tricky profile. I mean, it's tricky to find the spot for him. I know it's something you've mentioned before. Can he stick in right field, do you think? Is that kind of the slight hesitation there? Because I'm curious to see where he ends up as he rises up the ranks if he reaches the big leagues defensively.
Yeah, I think he's there's it's kind of where you just got to stash him, right? And I
Right.
just feel like I don't know. Maybe there's a little bit more there defensively, and he can develop. It's always
Yeah.
so hard to analyze defense in the Arizona Fall League because no one can see the baseball. So I didn't feel like I got like a fair chance to really assess him there. And I think that's going to be one of the last things I look at a little bit more. It's just like how decent can the defense be potentially? But right now it just looks like it's going to be 40 grade and just kind of trying to get by, and what puts even more pressure on the bat, right? Then you really, really have to mash because if you're not grading out as an average defender in a corner outfield spot, you better be producing at a really, really high clip. So that's what puts a lot of pressure on the bat and probably keeps him just outside. But I think you can get by in a right field spot.
Yeah, that makes sense for sure. And if he does, the back could seriously play and he could end up being even a guy that moves up the top 100 next year easily.
No doubt. And I think the floor now is elevated to a guy that
Yeah.
with the bat speed gains, with the power gains, I think it could be a short platoon at the very least. I mean, you combine the Arizona Fall League this year, Valdez has a
Yeah.
1,098 OPS against left-handed pitching,
Yeah.
11 homers, 11 doubles in 147 plate appearances. I mean,
Yeah.
it's just ridiculous stuff.
It's a big leaguer at least, right? In
Yep.
one way or another, right?
Yep.
The next pair of guys up, two of the best players in the league, and the other guy I think actually might have a really good shot at MVP here. Max Anderson, Kevin McGonigal of the Tigers organization. Obviously, Kevin McGonigal. We've talked enough about Kevin McGonigal. I don't think we need to touch on him too much. Max Anderson's an interesting one because this guy has kind of gotten undervalued in that Tiger system because you've got Max Clark, because you've got Kevin McGonigal, because you've got Josue Briseño, right? Max Anderson had a really, really good season in
Yep.
Double A and then even finishing it in Triple A. Has gone out to the Fall League. He leads the Fall League in on base percentage and OPS right now. He has a 14-18 OPS in the Fall League right now. He's walked 18 times, only struck out 9 times, 9 extra base hits in those 14 games for Anderson. This guy's been one of the best hitters in the Fall Leagues. He was one of the best hitters in Double A this season. Like, he could be a big leaguer for the Tigers next season.
Yeah, he's definitely into the equation here, which is
Yeah.
I think fascinating because both he and McGonigal are playing third
Right.
base out there, which is fascinating. And I think McGonigal is going to give you a little bit more with the glove too. So I mean, it
Right.
looks like McGonigal has got that inside track, of course. But the fact that they have another guy here that it could potentially be an option there, and if McGonigal ultimately ends up sliding over to short for them, or playing second base, whatever it may be, I think they're still trying to figure out exactly what's going to happen with Glaber and free agency and some of the other moving parts that they have to their ball club. I, I think this is just another great option to have that could be, up there sooner rather than later. I really do like the swing. It seems like he lives in the zone forever, and I think that really allows him to just crush breaking balls and line drives kind of to all fields. And I think when you're looking at what he did, this is another player that I think is just really validating the breakout. And it's a really simple operation. He's in his base. He just kind of loads into the backside, and then it's again this really wide range here with the barrel entering the zone and how long it stays through there. So that paired with, above average exit velocities, he's consistently hitting the ball hard. He recognizes spin really well. Another player where I think you look at the floor as short platoon guy in Max Anderson, but now I think you're seeing the ceiling start to raise more as a guy that could potentially play, infield every day between second base and third base, and I think I got to learn a little bit more about the glove, but clearly the bat's going to play. And even though the contact traits aren't plus, I think you're seeing he just does a great
Yeah.
job of battling in at bats, the approach, especially with two strikes. And that's why he only struck out about 15% of the time this year when you combine the fall league as well.
Yeah, I mean he's crushing it. He has been crushing it all season. I'm really curious what the situation there with that infield is because, like you said, Anderson could be an option at second, could be an option at third. You seem to think, and I think we all seem to think that McGonigal is still the option A at shortstop for the Tigers, right? Like they don't have it's Javi Baez, it's Trey Sweeney, and it's Kevin McGonigal. So like I still feel like it's Kevin McGonigal at shortstop, which then puts you in a position where Zach McKinstry shouldn't be holding back either of these guys either. Yeah, Zach McKinstry had a good season, but like you should be able to work both these guys into your lineup in Detroit next season. I just think it's about how they decide to shuffle around everyone in that infield, right?
That's Silver Slugger winner, Zach McKinstry
Sorry, my
here.
bad.
So,
It's true.
no, it's really interesting. I think it's a great spot to be where, I think if you're the Tigers, you should be pursuing some players in free agency
Right.
here and looking at that route. What's interesting is McKinstry's a reverse splits guy, 820 or 837
Hmm.
OPS against lefties. So I'm thinking, oh, well, maybe you platoon him a little bit. McKinstry, I feel like they're going to move around a little bit, but I like him, potentially at second base. You have Clark, you have, excuse me, McGonigal at shortstop, and I think that makes more sense. I will say I was watching the video of McGonigal at third. He looks already so comfortable there, and like that's a position where I think he would grade out still pretty well, even though the arm is average. Like same reason why he gets by at shortstop. Instincts are good, works behind the ball well, gets it out quick. But you also got to wonder,
Right.
like, what did they do with Colt Keith? He did have a good offensive second half, but and he was a little bit hurt at the end of the year. He's not the best defender in the world either. They have a lot to sort through here in terms of how they want to go about their infield. Because you saw Keith play some second, play some third. At the end of the day, I think he's still less of a defender than the other guys we're talking about here. And I think with Anderson, you can just stash him in AAA a little bit longer and say, okay, we're going to just continue to let him develop and get reps. But I think Clark is also going to force, I think, their hand. But you also look at McGonigal. I'm just looking at the Tigers list right now. Eh, With McGonigal, I feel like he's going to force their hand a little bit more, and
Uh,
I think that's where you got to
yeah.
figure something out sooner rather than later. So I'm fascinated by it all, and I think there's a lot to sort through if you're the Detroit Tigers, because you also look at the DH spot. Carey's going to kind of sit there for a while
Right.
and eat a lot of the games there. So you may not be able to run players through there as much. But I think that the goal is to continue to rotate players through that DH spot. And I think that's going to keep things open for them. But they have a lot to figure out. I think McGonigal forces their hand a little bit sooner, whereas Anderson, you can, take a little bit more time and, I think have him build on, what already was a great year in AAA.
Yeah, and part of me has to think that they're considering adding a big name like a Bo Bichette at shortstop, right? If you add a Bo Bichette, then maybe McGonigal at third does make sense as you ease him into his career, right? Or he starts at third and he makes his way to shortstop, right? He talked to Emily Walden this past weekend, last week at the Arizona Fall League, and we have a great quote from him, an article that just went up on justbaseball.com of him basically saying how fun it's been for him to play third because he feels like he's learning new skills that he can implement wherever he plays and that, he's able to just kind of work himself into different positions. So it's really cool that, to see that he's comfortable and excited to be working all over the infield. And like, this is a guy who's going to be in the big leagues next year. It's
Yep.
just, and if you move him around, like, so be it. It's not the worst thing for guys in the beginning of the career, in my opinion, to move around a little.
No.
Someone as talented as him, right? Like, it might just be the best way to get him acclimated into the big leagues, right?
And he's a gamer. I think certain
Yeah.
players may affect them more. I think for him it makes all the sense in the world. And I think as we're talking about that, like the fact that he's just able to have some reps at third and feel comfortable there, like it
Yeah.
gives you a little bit of versatility here, I think,
Yep.
in free agency where you say, okay, let's pursue Bregman, let's pursue Bichette, and we don't have to feel like we
Yep.
have to go one way or another because our top prospect is able to fill in wherever we don't
Yep.
acquire. So I think even more reason to just kind of go for the player that you think just fits best for you in general, the player that you're most confident in giving a longer term deal to, and then go from there.
Yeah.
But I think that makes it a really fun conversation as well. And the last thing, I think Anderson Colt Keith platoon makes a lot of sense. Colt Keith had a
Yeah.
395 OPS. He was
Ooh.
7 for 44 with one extra base hit against lefties this year, or this past year. You have Anderson eventually come up and take the short side of that platoon, and be a bat off the bench as well. And all of a sudden, you have a really versatile, unique Tigers lineup here that I think could be a lot of fun.
Yeah, I would absolutely love, even if it's an AL Central guy, I would love to see the Tigers get a Bichette or a Bregman, pair that with a big pitcher, and then you've got McGonigal and Clark and Anderson all to fill in from there. They've been in the divisional round 2 years in a row. Like, who's to say the Tigers with one big bat and you add all these young guys into the mix, like that team could be a real force in the American League sooner than later, honestly.
100%. And those guys are all going to be cheap, right? They're controllable. So spend some money now. Uh,
Exactly.
and I'd also want to retain Tarek Skubal, but we'll see.
Yeah, maybe give the best pitcher in baseball a huge deal too. That
Yeah.
that would help. Yeah, that would
Yeah.
help. Moving on to our next guy. This is someone I'm particularly interested in hearing your thoughts on how he's looked in the fall. Seaver King of the Nationals organization is a guy who had a really rough season. In full honesty, right? This is a guy who was a first round pick, and obviously, goes through some struggles, right? This past season, in between high A and double A, he was a little better in high A, but getting to double A, King really struggled in his first, full professional season here this season. It wasn't a case of injury or needing more innings or anything. It was a case of, hey, you had kind of a rough season. Let's see these adjustments. Let's see you make some changes. Let's see you kind of face some different type of pitching and see what happens. And it's been really good for Seaver King. 18 games in the fall league, 359, 468, 563, is walking at a really good clip. 8 extra base hits in that span, driving in a lot of runs, stealing some bags, 6 for 6 in stolen bases as well for Seaver King. It's good to see this step from him after a tough season.
Yeah, no matter what. I mean, even if you're a
Yeah.
first round guy
Yeah.
who was in double A at the end of the year, when it was as rough as it was for Seaver, I think any positive results are definitely encouraging. What becomes difficult for me is I think a big reason, and it was kind of a yellow flag in his draft profile as well, was, well, one, putting the ball on the ground, two, the chase rate, right? And this regular season, he had a 35% chase rate. Now you get to the AFL where there's a lot more easy takes, right? Guys just missing the zone by a mile, and it's an auto take. That's going to help your chase rate, right? But I think he went out there with a tangible plan of I need to be more selective because beyond just the chase rate, his swing rate is down 13% from where it was at, in the regular season. And I think that had to be something that the Nationals said, or just him himself figured out and said, I need to find a way to be more selective and shrink the zone a bit more. He also has hit the ball in the air more, and I don't really care about the environment or whatever it may be. Like that is a good sign, right? It went from like 55% ground ball rate. I understand it's an 18 game sample, but it's down to like 42. So those are two really encouraging things. I think the chase rate's a little bit harder for me because it's again a lot easier to be selective. I think there's days where I'm getting on base 2 or 3 times in the AFL. Like I watched a couple games, and it's not because I moved the bat off my shoulder. Like it's just how it goes, right? So
Yeah.
it's still in general, I think it's really encouraging. There's no question about the tools. He's consistent. He hit the ball hard even this past year, and you're
Yeah.
seeing him. I mean, very small sample, but 49 batted balls. He's got a 61% hard hit rate in the AFL this year. So I mean, for a player that I think was one of the more disappointing performances of any first rounder from last year, I think this is very, encouraging, and you hope he can build on it. But we do see this, right? We do see guys that dominated in college, have a rough first year, then go to the fall league, play well, and then don't quite follow it up as much the next year, as much as you'd hope. But I do think he's capable of doing so. And he even showed signs of life at the end of the regular season. So
Yeah.
I think the hope is that he builds on that and gives you a much better season this year.
Right. And Washington needs those guys that they can, ping as pieces of the future at least. And I think they still very much see him as one of those core pieces. So you just, you build off this, you continue to work on that approach, you limit the chase, right? And you take what you've done in the fall league and you carry into next season with a little more confidence even. Maybe that's all, that confidence level of, hey, I know I can mash like this, like that can give him a big boost heading into, double A ball next year.
And it's a second taste of double A after
Right.
having some good results in the fall league.
Right.
I think things are lining up for a bounce back, and you just hope that he's able to do so. And I think the approach is going to be the really interesting thing to monitor, because even with the
Yeah.
ground ball rate being a little bit high, he flies, he hits the ball really hard. I think he could get away with a slightly elevated ground ball rate. But remember, I think when they drafted him, remember he's a D2 transfer, played 1 year in ACC ball for Wake Forest. I think King was always kind of viewed as a project relative to most collegiate players in that
Right.
draft, and it wasn't always going to be a linear path for him. So he still was assigned relatively aggressively for a relative project, and I think this would be the year where if it's another slow start in Double A and it doesn't really get much better a couple of months in, then I'd start to be concerned. But I think it's okay to call last year just kind of getting your feet wet and see this as a step in the right direction.
Yeah, 100%. Next guy up, one of my guys, one of your guys that you had, been on from the start. We both have been on this. Sam Antonachi of the White Sox organization. This is a guy who I've had, somewhat of a flag planted in here for the last year and a half because what he did this past season in the minors was incredible. This was not a case of let's bounce back in the fall league or whatever. This was more of a case of let's just carry this momentum and let's see just how good you can be going into next season, where he's going to have a chance to be in Chicago fairly soon next season, as being after being a fifth rounder in the 2024 draft. Antonachi so far in the AFL is getting on base at a 511 clip, 1074 OPS. He's walked 14 times, struck out only 10, 11 stolen bases. You're starting to see the power tick up a little. I think that's the biggest thing with Antonachi. This is a guy who's touted for the plate approach, for the hit tool. But in the fall league, 3 home runs, 3 doubles. You're seeing a little bit more launch. You're seeing a little bit more on the exit velo side. One of the homers, I believe, was around 107 exit velo, which is not something we saw from him too often this season. I talked to him last week in a press conference from the White Sox, and he was basically just saying how you can feel the ball fly a little more there. He was like, I can tell the ball is flying a little more, and I'm trying to like play into that and make sure that I'm getting into my loft. He had an opposite field homer this past week. Not a guy you see hit an opposite field homer as much, given his stature for sure. He really just looks like he's taking what he did this season and building on it more. And from all indications, like he's going to have a shot to be in Chicago pretty early next season, even though he's only played 50 games in Double A.
Yeah, I mean, you saw how I think excited the White Sox were with like a Chase Mydroth in terms of
Yeah.
just the floor being high, and I think there's a
Yep.
lot of similarities in terms of just being able to be aggressive with a guy like this and
Yeah.
know that he's going to survive, and then I think
Yep.
beyond that, it becomes the question, as you alluded to, with the impact of like, okay, we know he can survive, and like Mydroth proved that he could survive. He actually got off to a fantastic start, but can the production prevail over 162? And that's where the impact comes in, right? And I think that's the next step that we're looking at for my draft. Like, can he impact the baseball enough, and have the approach, be there enough to be a consistent producer? That's where I think Antonachi, the big reason why he's out there, as you mentioned, but also I think that's something that's going to be fun to monitor. I think he's got obviously a little bit more impact than what you see from Mydroth. And I think with Mydroth, even a little bit more bat to ball. But I think that's a good exchange here. I think you'd rather have a little bit more of the impact, given that when it's a sub 20 chase and it's still in zone contact just shy of 90%. Yeah, you're going to feel pretty good about that guy's floor. So it really does just come down to how consistently can he impact the ball at a high clip. And I think what we saw is it's a little bit more sneaky than a lot of people
Yeah.
may have thought. And with a hard hit rate that was like right at 40%, he's continued to lean into that in the fall league. And when you look at what he's done in the fall league, he was like kind of one of those perfect candidates that you just knew was
Right.
going to perform out there with the approach, with the bat the ball. And it was just going to be a matter of, is it just more bat to ball oriented, or is he slugging a little bit more? And we've seen him slug a little bit, so I think that's the exciting part. I'd still like to see him pull the ball in the air a little bit more, but
Yeah.
still, in general, I think you mentioned being able to pull a couple homers out and flash that. I think is really encouraging. And I think the next question just becomes the defensive side of things. They mixed him in at shortstop a couple times. They mixed him in at third. I think ultimately he profiles as
Yeah.
second baseman and probably just a fine one there. But what does he provide beyond the bat? I think will be an interesting thing to monitor as well.
Yeah, to me, it seems like he's viewed as a second baseman, a guy who can plug at third or short, right? If you need him to play some third or short off the bench, like he can. He probably is a second baseman, which creates an interesting situation there because he probably is competing with Mydroth, who's kind of been the comp for him, right? But while he also has the slight power edge, maybe could tap into more impact compared to Mydroth, right? The speed is also something to look at there. 134 games between the minors and now the AFL, 60 stolen bases between those two levels now. So it's not, he's gotten caught a handful of times, right? It's not a perfect stolen base guy, but he can run and he's aggressive with running. And that's one thing where, if you get a guy whose hit tool is that strong, he can get to, maybe 10 homer power in his upside, right? It's not going to be a powerful bat, but if he has that type of approach, he's walking that much and he also can steal 30, 40 bags through at the big league level potentially, then it kind of helps round out that profile a little bit further too.
Yeah, I think the speed will be interesting because, like, from a straight line sprint aspect, like he's not
Right.
the
Yep.
fastest, but the instincts are clearly good and like he's clearly quick enough. So if that can be an aspect of his game, absolutely, that'd be a huge wrinkle to be able to add.
Yeah, exactly. The next guy, switching over to the other side of Chicago, I had no idea who Owen Ayers of the Cubs organization was. I'll be completely honest. I had never heard this name before the AFL started, and he's been good pretty consistently the entire Arizona Fall League. This was a senior signing 19th rounder in 2024 from Marshall University, a guy who spent, only played a couple games last season, only played 65 games in single A as a 24-year-old this year because he dealt with an injury. It was very solid in those 65 games, but 65 games for age 24 season in single A, you're not reading much into that. He comes out to the fall league as a guy just to get some innings. 20 games in the fall league for Owen Ayers, an 1130 OPS, 22 walks, 8 extra base hits. What you got on this guy who's emerging as like one of the best hitters in the fall league after being not a known name at all?
Yeah, it's the 24 years old is wild, but
Yeah,
with barely any pro reps under his belt,
right.
he's torching balls. And when I was out there, the games I went to, he was torching balls there. Like it's pretty crazy. It's a small sample, 19 games, but he's an EV 90 of 108.5 miles per hour and 85 plate appearances. Like that's pretty crazy stuff. You extrapolate it over the whole season for the 83 games, combining the two, and it's a 106. So clearly he hits the ball hard. I have no idea what kind of defender he is. He's a big
Yeah.
guy. They mixed him in at first base and right field, so I think that kind of tips the hand there a little bit. But the Cubs are so good at this thing, man. They are so good at scouting hitters and identifying some talent late in drafts and or after drafts. And I think this is just another example of that where like I don't know what it's going to look like. Who knows if it fully translates at the upper levels? But clearly, a great snag there really late
Yeah.
with a player that it seems to have a patient approach. Clearly has above average to potentially plus raw power, and hits the ball in the air pretty consistently, and you get it from both sides of the plate as well. So I'm interested. Like I think they're going to push him relatively quickly now that he got his first little taste of pro ball and showed that he can actually play. In the Arizona Fall League, I think we could see him go to high A and then if he responds well there to double A pretty quickly, and I think that's where he can potentially solidify himself as not just kind of an org guy and a legit prospect that they have. And I think he's already proven that he's a little bit more than an org guy.
Yeah, that's one of the crazy things with the fall league is you get guys who are 24 years old with no experience basically in pro ball, and then you also have 21-year-olds who have 2 years of pro ball under their belt and they're trying to make the big leagues, right? It's such a funny league because of that, and this is one of those names who you're gonna get guys that emerge like this, and he's a name that just has flown onto radars from an incredible month in Arizona now that he's finally healthy.
Again, there were some loud hits off of his bat. So yeah,
Yeah,
I'm very
see what
eager to
happens.
see how he can follow this up.
Yeah, definitely a name to keep an eye on. Speaking of some older guys who, aren't necessarily the biggest name, Parks Harbor of the Giants organization is someone that we talked about earlier in the season. We mentioned, we had him on a heat sheet because he had a heck of a season, was traded from the Yankees to the Giants organization this season, who was out in the Duvall trade. And he, it just turned 24 this past month, but had an incredible season on a per game basis, was one of the better hitters in minor league baseball, but only played 79 games. Now he gets to the fall league, and I got a buddy who works with the Giants right now, and he speaks nothing but incredibly high things of Harbor and just what he's been able to do this season since getting over there. A 12-16 OPS in the fall league, 9 doubles, 3 homers, walks at a pretty good clip. This guy could be a pretty good get from that Duvall deal for the Giants.
I mean, yeah, he was an interesting watch when I was doing the Yankee system before the trade, as just you just couldn't ignore the power. And
Yeah.
there was kind of a question of, okay, he's a little bit of a stiff mover. He's limited to first base, but maybe they can try him a little bit more in a corner, and I'm interested to see what that looks like. But I think the third base thing is kind of over. So it's just like, what's the defensive outlook going to be? But again, you can get a lot more patient with the defensive outlook when you've got a guy who can really run into baseballs. The power to all fields too. I mean, it's. I mean, he's really crushing balls pull side, but you see him hit balls out, backside. Sometimes even miss hitting balls that continue to carry over the outfielder's head. And I mean, 56% hard hit rate, 90th percentile exit velocity north of 108 miles per hour, and just another player where you say, okay, this was an encouraging year. Can he just keep it rolling? And he absolutely has.
Yeah.
And I think the ability to recognize spin is what stood out in the fall league specifically. He's chased like 12% of breaking balls, and I think that's a really encouraging wrinkle, because I think for a guy like him, he's going to be crushing mistakes, and you want him staying on spin and probably skewing a little bit more towards the three true outcomes. But I think the bat to ball is a little maybe more underrated than we had thought.
Yeah, it seems like he could end up being a pretty well-rounded hitter here. Obviously, not it's a hit first profile for sure. I mean, the offensive profile is what you're focusing on here, but a guy that I think has the upside to be a pretty interesting piece. And obviously, 24, right? So you think he'd probably he only spent whatever it was, 70 something games in high A this season, but I feel like he's probably going to go straight to double
Oh
as a
yeah.
24-year-old, especially after what he did this year. And like, given his age and his and the profile of probably being a corner infield guy, like you could see a guy like Harper debut late next season and become, get a shot to earn some innings in San Francisco. The only thing there is very crowded corner infield, obviously, with Chapman, Devers, and Eldridge. So I'm curious to see how he could fit into that mix, but obviously that's a question for a little while down the road still.
Yeah, and the last thing on him is with Harbor, sometimes a trade, even when you're playing at the same level, can kind of just shake a guy up
Right.
and be jarring for them. And after the trade, he played 29 games at high A for Eugene and the Giant system, and this is including four postseason games. And he posted an 11.15 OPS with a 19% K rate and a 14% walk rate, and then followed it with what he's doing in the AFL. So I can guarantee with what he's doing now, this is a player that is continuing to elevate himself in that Giant system.
Yeah, 100%. Pair of Milwaukee Brewers here that kind of go in tandem, and two guys we've talked about plenty on the show in the past, Luke Adams and Josh Adamchevsky. I'm pretty
Yep.
sure I got it right. Hoping I did. There we go. But two guys that are, just exciting upside hitters in that Brewers system that is filled with upside hitters. We've talked about them before, but like, what are kind of some of the things you're looking at from these guys in the fall league? Because they're both still very young. Adams being 21, Adam Shepsky being 20. So a pair of these infielders from Milwaukee who you're excited about, and like you send these guys to the fall league because you want to see more from them and you want to see them against higher competition. But these guys are two of the younger hitters that are putting up numbers like this in the fall league, and they haven't looked phased at all so far.
I think from a data perspective, Luke Adams may be one of the most impressive, hitters in the fall league so far, because he's not whiffing at all. And, I think that was the
Mhm.
interesting thing. He's managed whiff really well as a pro, but it just, when you look at the swing and the moving parts and, the unorthodox nature to what he's doing, and sometimes just some of the haphazard swings he would take, you kind of wondered how it would play at the highest level, and if that strikeout rate would start to kind of rear its head a little bit, kind of like the conversations we're having with like Christian Campbell. But we talked about it in the interview with him. Like, Adams is focused on simplifying things, and I think making it a little bit easier for himself to get to the same spot and to be on time and not have as many variables in that swing. And I'm going to preface everything with the small sample size, 70 plate appearances here, but he has run an in zone contact rate in the AFL of 93% and an overall contact rate of 84%. Luke Adams is yet to swing and miss at a four seam fastball in the zone, and he's seen 104 four seam fastballs total. Um, he's clearly just on time way more consistently, and you're seeing him pull the ball in the air really impressively. You're seeing him go backside, like it's all fields. I think there's something to be said about just focusing on the hitting and not really playing third base anymore, and they've pretty much just had him at
Yeah.
first. Like, just focus on first base and go mash, and that's what he's been doing. I think I think I've always kind of thought he's one of the more underrated players in that system, and I understand just the unique nature of his swing and everything can draw some skepticism. But now that he's heading in the right direction in that department, and you've got the batted ball data to back it, I think Luke Adams is an exciting riser in an organization that continues to do a really good job of maximizing or just getting more out of those types of guys.
Yeah, for sure. He seems like a guy who, is going to keep rising up boards. That data is very impressive to hear because, there's been some things there you used to want to see him improve upon throughout the regular season, but now it seems like he has so far. Interesting note on Adam Chetsky here. A guy who mostly was a second baseman throughout the last year and a half, 2 years, has played mostly
Yeah,
left field in the
yeah.
AFL. He played 4 games in the outfield in his entire minor league career up to this point, and now has been primarily in left in the Arizona Fall League. What are you interested in kind of the pivot there from them? I think maybe it's just the fact that they have so many infielders in that system that they want to get this guy some shine in the outfield potentially.
Yeah, it's funny because generally speaking, I'm a believer of just you put the player where you think he's going to
Right.
play best and go from there. But when you've got the situation that the Brewers have with, I think Mate, who probably ends up being a second baseman, Luis Pena, who probably ends up being a second baseman, and then just some of the other talent that they have up the middle, it creates an interesting situation. I think with Adam Shesky, the bats, the calling card here, and he's not bringing a ton of value with second base wise. So I think just being able to at least even just have that versatility, I think is huge. And I like the profile as a corner outfielder as well because I think he's going to have enough power to be able to shoulder that. He was another player that probably would have had more of a breakout and been, I think started to be floated up on, maybe even some top 100 consideration had he not gotten hurt and just only played 71 games. So for him to be able to just get these reps in the fall league and while
Yeah.
learning a new position where it's impossible to catch fly balls, do what he's doing offensively. I mean, the 4 homers in 20 games start really flashing, some of that impact. He's hit the ball really, really hard out there. Some 110 pluses. Like there's a lot to like with him. And the
Yeah.
fact that he might be able to develop some versatility as a left fielder and second baseman as well, I think is really encouraging. And a guy that you probably want to see make up for some lost time. And I think this is a great start to doing so. He's going to get to high A next year. He'll be 20 years old, turn 21, a couple months into the season. And a guy that you probably want to see in Adam Shesky and Biloxi at some point, in the middle of the
Yeah.
season or at the start of the second half. And I think this fall league can kind of expedite that timeline a little bit and make up for that lost time.
Yeah, 100%. Two more guys in that system, man. That is a really nasty farm system
Oh
that I
yeah.
know is going to be on the next handful of updates as we get into the offseason more. Because man, there's a lot of guys in that system that are pretty fun to watch.
Oh yeah.
The next name is probably one of the more aggressive assignments, I would say, of the AFL. Daniel Vasquez of the Royals organization is an interesting one to me because you look at his season and, yeah, he played 105 games, but in high A, couple of games to finish out the year in double A, but primarily spent the season in high A and not particularly impressive, numbers wise, right? You look at the numbers and it was a 98 WRC plus at the high A level, good amount of stolen bases, but pretty minimal power. Definitely more of a hit tool guy for a lanky 21-year-old infielder there. But in the AFL, has had a really strong showing, even after kind of being a little bit of an aggressive assignment here. 19 walks has contributed to a 459 on base percentage for Vasquez. More homers in the AFL than he had all season in 100 plus games. So in 22 games in the AFL, he has 2 homers and 5 doubles. You're seeing a little bit more impact there. 11 stolen bases as well. Not a name that we're super tapped in on. What do you think about Vasquez's performance so far here?
Yeah, I think it's somebody that they're looking at and saying that there could be more here, right? He could
Yeah.
pick it a little bit, move all over the infield, and yeah, I think that the shortstop ability there that could develop, I think, is something that they're excited about. Yeah, and just being able to be that potential utility, infielder type, and I think we're seeing him lean into that a little bit more. I always love when you see the home run total topped and just micro sample size
Yeah.
compared to what you're doing in the regular season. That always is an indication of at least even in a good environment, some positive things happening. But he's still putting the ball on the ground at a really really high clip, and that's been interesting because he didn't do it as much even in the regular season. But he's also slugged a little bit more. So I think there's this process here of just improving the mechanics and getting some mixed results, but you're seeing some better top end stuff. I mean, he took Rhett Lauder deep on like 106 mile per hour AV. So there's positive signs there for a guy that's still just 21 years old and I think has some more room to fill out.
Yeah, no, it definitely seems like there's something to build off of here, and the Royals kind of, like you said, kind of marked him as this. Oh, okay, there's something to look at here, and now you're looking at his Arizona Fall League numbers, and you feel encouraged about the fact that this is a 21-year-old, shortstop who you can go into next season with, and maybe feel a little more. This might give you the confidence to put him in Double A fully, as opposed to trying to have him rerun High A after kind of a so-so season, right?
Yeah, they clearly want to get him reps. I mean, even bring him up
Right.
at the end of the high A season to play a handful of double A games,
Yep.
even though he wasn't performing that well.
Right.
I think it just kind of shows that they see something here.
Yep, definitely a name that I think is kind of worth keeping an eye on here in 2026 because the Royals seem to like what he's bringing to the table. The last guy on our list of hitters here from the AFL hitting standpoint, you guys talked about him. You and Jack talked about him a handful of weeks ago, but Charlie Pagliarini
Yeah.
of the Mariners organization. I'm glad I got the name right. I'm good on names today. I'm hot.
Yeah.
But the 2023 19th rounder, and this is I love that we've talked about like five guys who are like back end of the draft, like we'll see what happened guys, and now they're in the AFL and they're showing out because those are stories we like to follow here. So drafted in the 19th round in 2023, a guy that has been okay at both levels, right? I mean, he spent all of 24 in single A, he spent all of 25 in high A, and has been solid, not bad by any means. He had 21 homers this year, so you saw the power kind of start to shine. The overall numbers still, decent across the board. But now in the AFL, you're seeing not only the power, but you're just seeing a little bit more well-rounded game from Pagliarini here, who has a 913 OPS in the fall league, 14 walks, a seven extra base hits, 6 for 6 on stolen bases. What has he kind of shown beyond just the raw power numbers here in the fall?
I think getting into the raw power more, right? Because
Yeah,
he had the raw power this past regular season. And as you mentioned, it wasn't a bad year, but it wasn't anything crazy. But he had an EV90 of 108 miles per hour. He was just swinging and missing at secondary so much. It was really just kind of feasting on fastballs and then maybe really bad mistakes. But I mean, in the regular season, man, he hit 105. This is a left-handed hitter, right? So you're going to see a lot of changeups. He hit 105 against changeups, and if you combine that with splitters, he
oof,
below 100 against them. So it's not a big enough sample size in the AFL to draw anything against individual pitch types, right? And maybe they're not even going to be as good as what he was seeing. But I mean, when you have 7 hits, I think it was, or 6 hits in the regular season against changeups and
it's crazy.
splitters, and 67 plate appearances, and you've got 2 hits and 8 plate appearances against changeups. I mean, that's it could be just by happenstake, but like at least that's something that helps. I think that's obviously something to continue to monitor. There is just like how can he
Yeah.
hit those changeups and can that improve? But destroys fastballs and has continued to do that in the AFL. He's been hammering sliders and curveballs, which I think helps. It's just been the changeups that have really been that Achilles heel, and it's ridiculous raw power for a guy of his size. And you're seeing him get into that as much as ever in the fall league, where it's in 19 games at 109.5 mile per hour EV90. So this is clearly just special bat speed. And then you're seeing him just also show a little bit of versatility, playing a little bit of left, playing a little bit of second base. So a little bit on the older side. That said, I think when you've got clear plus raw power and potentially plus plus, like there's a
Yeah.
lot of reasons to keep giving this guy opportunities. And I think Pagliarini going into next year, where we didn't even see him playing Double A yet, at least has I think a little bit more under his belt to make that leap to Double A. Because he's gonna be 25 years old, and it's gonna be sink or swim. That's how it goes with a 25-year-old getting his first taste of Double A. It's sink or swim. But now I have a little bit more confidence in maybe his ability to swim.
Yeah, it seems like the guy who you send him straight to Double A. He had a good fall. He had 21 homers in the regular season. You say here, let's see this on a regular basis at the Double A level, and then we can go from there because you'd love to have a guy with that raw power, even if it ends up being like a more of a platoon guy, right? Like if you can have that raw power, play multiple positions, play some infield, play some outfield. Like he's played third base too, so like he has experience at second, third, and both corners in the outfield, right? So if you can have a rotating, versatile guy with that type of raw power, you'd love for that to keep going. You got to see see the power translate in Double A like it has in the fall so far.
And that's going to be the big test because you're going to see some
Yeah,
good changeups. 26 homers though in 139 games when you combine the fall league as well. I
yeah,
mean, it's a hell of a year. So
yeah,
there's plenty to be excited about. I think is just a guy that's lower on the totem pole of a really good farm system, but Yeah, I'm eager to see how he can make the leap if he can to double A, and if he does, I think you'll see. Yeah, I think his prospect status ascend a little bit more.
Yeah, definitely. Well, this was fun. Obviously, the Arizona Fall League takes, somewhat of a backseat when we have playoffs going on and we've got, end of season stuff going on. But at the same time, it's a fun league. There's always good
Oh yeah.
takeaways, and we'll see because a lot of these names we just talked about, we could easily see them in the big leagues next year and the year after for sure. So definitely guys to keep an eye on, and we'll do a pitcher's version of this here soon as well.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to checking in on the arms because I think the arms there's it might be even more intrigue in terms of some of these guys and like what they've shown out here versus what we were
Yeah.
able to see in the regular season. And I think you can take a little bit more from the pitch data. So I'm excited to dive into the arms
Yeah.
because we've got a lot of talented guys out there.
Yeah, for sure. One quick plug here for those listening to the call up. Any students out there, we are currently in the application process for interns for 2026 for just baseball. Obviously, as we continue to grow the prospect side of things specifically, we would love to have one or two people who are students right now that are interested in diving into the baseball world, get some hands-on experience with us here. We're really excited to continue to grow the staff here, continue to build things out at just baseball. And this is the most nerdy aspect of what we do. Obviously, the prospect world, we love it, and we're passionate about it. And we think we've got some really cool things growing here with the call up. So definitely make sure to check that out on the Just Baseball socials, LinkedIn, all the above.
Yeah, and we'd love to have you in our Discord as well. You can join that in the episode description. Top 100 is going to be coming out in the coming days, so keep an eye out for that as well. And I'll be answering a lot of questions on that in the Discord, which I'm very much looking forward to. As always, thank you for listening. Look forward to talking prospects with you. We got some player interviews coming up very soon, later this week.